Hi, welcome to Still Evolving, where we explore the truth behind lasting performance and resilience. Rather than relying on perfection or superhuman ability, our conversation will highlight how real strength emerges through simple, intentional habits grounded in self compassion, adaptability, and the ability to grow through life's inevitable setbacks. Today's guest is John Neal, the Executive Director for Space Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. John founded the Chamber's Space Leadership Council, where he works to strengthen America's space economy by bringing together policymakers, industry leaders, and the public around one central idea: that our prosperity in the 21st century depends on a thriving space sector. Before stepping into his current role, John spent nearly a decade as an FBI special agent, leading the national security and criminal investigations in Buffalo and Washington, D.C. He also advised top officials on mergers and acquisitions with national security implications through the CFIUS process. John's career has spanned service in the U.S. Navy as an airborne reconnaissance officer, policy work on Capitol Hill with the House Homeland Security Committee, and leadership roles in the private sector with companies like Planet Labs and NXP Semiconductors. He's a graduate of the University of Notre Dame, where he earned a BA in government and holds an MBA from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Please welcome John Neal. Awesome. Welcome, John. I'm very grateful to have you here today and excited to have our conversation. Why don't we just kick off the conversation with you sharing a bit of your background, your
Sure.
journey, and the motivations along the way.
Thanks, Amy. So, John Neal, I work for the United States Chamber of Commerce, which basically represents the U.S. business community to the federal government and Congress. So, I work particularly in the aerospace and defense industries, companies that do defense work or work with NASA or the aviation industry. And my job is to represent their business interests to the government from, as the government thinks about new laws or regulations that might impact their business. And I really try and tell the story about the mission that company may support and really the jobs and the economic impact back wherever that company resides or has facilities and employees, how, the opportunities to grow and create new jobs and opportunities for Americans, how that's so important, and then help shape that decision around those factors.
Awesome. I can only imagine the journey in that space, both on the private industry that have those conversations you may be having currently, given a very volatile, fast-paced commercial environment, and then flip side, the interplay between representing their interest and interacting with our government condition. So, I'm eager to learn and loving these conversations with leaders as they reflect on their journey and learning from them around when adversity strikes. What has helped you keep evolving, finding opportunities in perhaps a stage or an experience of chaos or crisis? But what do you do? What have you done when you're getting punched in the gut? And how do you keep moving forward? Because it's got to be challenging on both sides, private industry and on the government side.
Yeah. I'll take it back maybe way too far, but something that's always stuck with me was going back to 8th grade, right? And I'm playing on the varsity basketball team at our school. My world, that was the biggest thing I could be doing at the time. And I had a coach, very demanding at the time, but someone I worshiped, and I wanted to sort of please him, right? And I wanted to be successful as an athlete for him. And one day we had very intense, hard practices, and I got my butt kicked by one of my teammates. And he lines us up on the baseline, and for about 5 minutes, he just tore into me. And there might have even been a couple parents in the room, but, it was really embarrassed. You're too nice and you let people take advantage of you and all that. And I think at that point, sitting there thinking about that, I'm like, he's never going to say that about me again, right? I'm going to sort of change how I think and approach playing this game and whatnot. And it really, to this day, every now and then I think about that. And it really changed how I played basketball that year and going forward. I think really made me successful as an athlete, but also in other parts of my life, like when you get criticized by people, whether it's constructive or otherwise, try and find something of value in that criticism. It always hurts, right? And there's a personal aspect to it, but try and separate that after some time and think about like, hey, what did they say, or what did they find that has some merit there, and how can I change it? And so I think that thing, again, and I don't think about that consciously every time, and I run into adversity every single day probably. But I think those sort of lessons really help me to get over the pain that comes from failure or adversity or criticism. And then hopefully, do I improve? Probably not all the time as much as I'd like, but just sort of that resilience, pick myself back up and think about in sports, the next player, the next opportunity.
Wow, I played ball myself. I can I have many memories of standing on the baseline
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Well,
and and
Bobby
and
Knight, right?
yeah,
That
and
type of stuff.
hearing it, or
Yeah.
just the whistle blowing and we're just running
Right.
for it.
Absolutely.
But I think to your larger point, like when we are when we do get that feedback, that criticism, even when we don't ask for it,
Right.
it can be so jarring. And I very much appreciate that mindset of, okay, but if I can take a step back outside of the emotional reaction, right? What is the takeaway? And I think that a really flexible mindset to pull out of the reaction is so powerful. I I remember early in this field, there were a couple of mentors, just colleagues who I looked up to coming out of grad school, and just hearing their experiences. And I went to listen to one of their talks at a conference. And I had another young colleague said, "Oh, they're just so egotistical. They're so arrogant. I can't handle." And was there an element of that description that was on point? Yeah, there was. And so when something is off-putting or jarring, it can kind of put that barrier up and be reluctant to listen to the data. Having that attitude or that mindset of I can learn from anyone. Yeah, they may be an asshole, they may be really off-putting, but there's probably some takeaway there. So first of all, that's my love of sport and giving us
That's
those
right.
life lessons.
Yes.
But truly, it sounds like it's one that left an imprint in where you are now in your journey professionally. I can only imagine the
No,
conversations between private industry and government, and like almost reviewing that. What are my takeaways from
right.
the current challenge?
Right, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. And then sometimes, right, I lose my cool, or I want to punch back right away, or I'm really
Yeah.
angry for a period of time. But I think, take a deep breath after, let that pass, and then realize, yeah, as you said, there's an element of value in that feedback that might be useful to incorporate into whatever you're trying to accomplish.
For sure. One element of that journey has been your connection, and the power that comes in relationships,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Whether that's your team, whether that's your industry partners, and perhaps your experience with coaches. I'm just curious, can you share about your experience with the power of connection and how has that shaped your journey?
Yeah. I'll say I was real lucky, and I'll go back to, again, childhood, like elementary school. We had like three tiers, right? I think where they sort of put you into math class, like the lower tier, the upper tier, the really smart folks, in the middle. And I started off in the middle group. And I didn't really think about it too much then, but I think now how lucky I was, because I got to interact with some of the kids who maybe weren't taking school seriously. For whatever reason, they were in sort of that lower tier. And then I also eventually, I think my mother really pushed me to get into that top tier. So I got to interact with, maybe the higher performers academically. But what it gave me was, I don't know, I didn't know about empathy or anything like that. But, I wanted to make friends with whatever group I was interacting with. And so
Yeah,
listening to them, sort of understanding them, and you sort of, by living in these sort of two different worlds, sort of understood what they cared about, what they were afraid of. And I don't know, became a sounding board for them, or just aware that there were strengths and weaknesses. But at the end of the day, these were really good people and both good friends. And I think that's allowed me over time to go into situations and, again, be able to empathize or come to a level and of, number one, curiosity about a person's background, of interest, what motivates them and drives them. And then number two, be sensitive to a person's background or views, and find those areas of common interest or consensus that we may need to be successful at whatever objectives we're pursuing. And that's been very helpful. And the same thing, my passion about sports, and really team sports, and thinking about to be successful, we need the best, performers on that team and the worst performers on that team. We need to all be functioning together and getting along and having a relationship, and sort of wanting to be that person who is a glue person, or brings people together to have that team success. Cause that's what I find so much joy in life.
Yeah, absolutely. So relevant today, which feels very volatile at
Yeah.
times, societal conversations. Your journey underscores there's a lot more that we likely share. Perhaps maybe
Right.
we share in the diagnosis of the problem, and then there's going to be these iterations of how we can go about providing a solution to the problem. But if we're not listening, as you were describing, and if we can't be curious, it's going to be really hard to get past the initial reverb of this is a different solution.
Right.
And so I very much appreciate not just the empathy, but the curiosity, right? Like, how can we, by being curious, really try to understand differing perspectives? And that doesn't mean we have to throw away our own,
Right.
right? You can still hold your own
Absolutely.
values
Right.
and be true to that, but it really reflects an openness to growth and understanding. So part of being a leader, it sounds just tremendous kind of awareness that has come where your relationship skills have grown. And certainly when you talk about navigating, whether it's rough feedback or critical adversity, curious, how did you grow this reflective practice? Or what is your reflective practice that supports that evolution?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know there was anything conscious that I did. I think, it was a choice, when experience failure or some adversity in my life, to either, sort of curl up in a ball and be upset about it, for an undue period of time, or just get over it. And I tend to be a person who, when things happen, kind of blow up and let off that steam very quickly, and then sort of recenter. But I think it's just that choice in life. And I think it's sort of a optimistic mindset. Like, if I can get away from it, reset myself, and move on to the next opportunity, whether it's going to tomorrow's a new day, let's start it off right. The next play mentality in sports, whatever the next meeting, maybe separate myself from the task that's super frustrating and take a break and go to something different. I think it's really about, like, how can I reset when I'm running my head into the brick wall for a little bit, and try.
Yeah,
Hopefully it gives me an idea about a new approach.
I love it. It kind of reminds me, John, I had a great mentor along the way earlier on in my career, sports psychology consultant, Bill Moore. And he's helped coach athletes, he's helped coach performing artists. And he provided a framework for me and understanding, really it was in the context of if you make a mistake, right? If
Yeah.
there's a side step. But to your point with reflection, I love, because it is an actions of reflection that really helps you continue to grow. And Bill Moore's approach, he really captures some of what you were just sharing. First of all, you're going to have a reaction, right? Like you said, you're one who can kind of let off that steam. We're all human, and that's just how our brains are wired. When I can't get the podcast
Yeah.
technology to record to work. I don't know why I would bring that up, but when I can't, I'm going to have some I labeled frustration, right?
Yes.
And just having that self-awareness. But you also talked about then the power of refocusing. So given that level of frustration, is it something that perhaps you take a step back, you kind of break the contact from, to help regulate, cool your jets a little bit, so that
Yeah.
frontal lobe comes back on and you can refocus on the problem set. But it all really drives us towards being ready again. And
Mhm.
I think you bring a great point that the reflection helps us be ready, right? If we have to get back in the game, I'm not going to have the same problem
That's right.
twice.
That's right. Yep. Yeah.
Let's try something different this time.
Exactly.
And perhaps it works, and perhaps it doesn't, and I'll have my own reaction, and then I'll have to refocus, reset, and get
Yeah.
ready to release again.
That's right.
So I appreciate the power of reflection that comes in that process, for
Yeah.
sure.
For sure. And I something for me too. It's not only failure, defeat, or mistake. I think what I found, and again, I had someone, again, going back to this coach, like you're only as good as your last game, right? So even if I have success, I know that there's another opportunity or the game or the meeting, it's going to be different in some way. So that was wonderful. But how then do I even learn, from that success and think about being prepared because the next situation will be different and giving yourself grace if you do fail at that, but also knowing that, you don't get complacent.
Yeah. Yeah. If it's a dark hole that will suck
Yeah.
you right
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I always love learning and hearing about the power of leaders' mindsets or connection. Certainly, we've talked today about the ability to reset through the use of working through and having that reflective process. But I also like leaving our audience with a takeaway tool. Some people are like me and we can nerd out on this stuff. I can nerd
Yeah.
out on this stuff all day. But some people are like, okay, yeah, but what the hell can I do? For you, is there a go to tool or strategy that you have found that really has helped you continue your growth, continue your evolution, and such that you can show up in your own moments that matter for you professionally, personally, or step into them and perform as you so desire, optimize, and then
Yeah.
also find fulfillment in doing it? Is there a go to?
Yeah. I'll say something I've been trying to do more and I'm thinking about consciously trying to do is right before bed every night, pick up a book and read. And it'll usually put me asleep after about 5 pages or six, but it definitely calms me right after all day of trying to answer a million emails, stay on top of phone calls and incoming from my family or coworkers or customers, etc. It just sort of gives me a state of calm right before bed and gets me thinking whether it's pertinent to what I'm doing at work or just something that's easy and entertaining. I think just getting back to reading and sort of putting the phone down and some of these electronic, even turning off the TV and stuff, it really helps me
Yeah,
settle down and I think prepares me to wake up the next day sort of even more refreshed than a good night's sleep.
it's a great reminder. We talk a lot about the role of recovery for performance, and truly the number one enhancer being sleep.
Yeah.
N we focus on this when our kids are younger. If you're a parent, you have the whole bedtime routine, like
Right.
after dinner, we do the bath, and after the bath, we pick out the PJs, and then we
Right.
turn down the lights, and maybe we'll put a sound machine on, then we'll read a book, right? And it's a process. It's like half hour
Mhm.
process, right? And then somehow it gets lost on us that as adults, we drive all day, get home from work, get the dinner, the kids' activities, the homework, getting them all settled, and then shooting off our emails or responding to those texts. And then people are surprised. They immediately try to lay down and go to sleep. It's like that's not how it works, right? So the power of that wind down routine, I love it, and it's it's very impactful when we talk about resilience and performance.
Yeah.
So thank you for that helpful reminder. Put the screens down, people. Put the screens down
You
for a
find it,
minute.
yeah, you realize like how great books are. I've forgotten it from time to time. Just,
Yeah.
I don't have time to read a book. I'll never finish it. But even a couple pages, it just really, for me, it just settles me down, puts me in a great space to get, like you said, good rest.
Awesome. Love it. John, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been fun. And I
Yeah.
also think incredibly valuable. I appreciate your realness and sharing. And till next time, thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Really enjoyed speaking with you.